This is Bobby Stein. I'm going to read a portion of the book Where I Was Born and Raised by David Cohn called The Delta Land. The Negro's identification with the life of the Delta is fundamental and complete. He came here as a slave with the earliest settlers. He has remained to live and multiply as a freedman. This land is first and last his handiwork. It was he who brought order out of a primeval wilderness, felling the trees, digging the ditches, and draining the swamps. He erected the homes which shelter him and the white man. He built the schools, the courts, the jails, the factories and warehouses. He was a roustabout on the riverboats, which connected the Delta with the outside world, and toiled up the steep banks of the landings, bearing incredible loads on his shining black shoulders. The Negro was builder too of the railroads, which were forever to extinguish the glory of steamboating on the Mississippi and the gorgeous dynasty of the river captains. Later, he built the concrete roads, which in turn were to cripple the railroads. The vast ramparts of the levees upon whose existence the life of the Delta depends sprang from the sweat and brawn of the Negro. Wherever one looks in this land, whatever one sees that is the work of man, was erected by the toiling, straining bodies of blacks. The white men with whom the Negro came to the Delta as a slave were unique among pioneers. Here were no lean Yankees marching with rifle, family, and meager possessions across the illimitable plains. No refugees from the Germany of '48, no Irish of the famine years, empty-handed and eager, searching for a new home in a new world. These men were the embodiment of a seeming contradiction, pioneers with means. They were the sons of wealthy and moderately wealthy planters of Virginia, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Tennessee. They had a definite general culture and the deep-rooted sense of responsibility common to their kind. Used to wealth and possessing it, they were men of property, moving with their families, their slaves, and manifold possessions, like princely patriarchs of the Old Testament. The land to which they came was land of the loins of the river. It had sprung from the body of the Mississippi in a gestation eons long ago. Untold centuries ago, it began to deposit here the rich detritus of mountains and plains borne on its bosom as it flowed from the north to south to sea. Accretion by slow accretion, without foundation of rock or shale, it laid down this land. Here are no hills, no rocks, no thin earth barely hiding the stones beneath, but pure soil, endlessly deep, dark, and sweet, dripping fatness. And when, after tens of thousands of years, the land had been built, the forest came. There were oaks and cypresses, sweet gum and leafy cottonwood, persimmon and pecan, walnut and maple. Cane grew to great heights to make an impenetrable jungle. Vines and creepers laced with interfaced in an intricate tangle. Here was an animal's paradise of bear, deer, opossum, raccoon, rabbit, squirrel, panther, and mink. Birds native and migratory filled the silent woods with the loud music of the singing. In the autumn, dawn rose on the wings of myriads of wild ducks. Darkness fell with their swift descending flight to the bosoms of lakes and ponds. Snakes swarmed on the land and in the water. Mosquitoes ascended from the steaming swamps and clouds. Bullfrogs disturbed the austerity of the night with their obscene croakings. Turtles elongated their reptilian heads on logs rotting in green scum creeks. Century after century, the land lay as in a dream. The rich earth became ever richer with the decay of leaf mold and vegetation. The passionate embrace of deep-rooted trees and close-clinging vines made it secure against washing and erosion in torrential rains. The Spaniard came and Hernando de Soto was buried in the delta's river, but the land did not stir in its sleep. More than a century later, when Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, it was still primeval wilderness. It sent no soldiers to the War of 1812 because there were no men to send. It was not until 1825, scarcely more than 30 years before the Civil War, that the first settlers came. The civilization of the Delta is little more than 100 years old. At this time, many planters in the more northerly states of the South began to find that their farming operations were becoming unprofitable. Their lands, under an unwise system of cultivation, were losing their fertility. Some of them suspected that slavery was eating into their profits. These doubts, however, to be resolved for 40 years, and were to be expressed not in rows of black figures on white paper, but in rows of white grave markers on the dark earth. Rumors of the fertility of the soil of the Delta, then called the swamps, began to drift back to Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and South Carolina. Planters made inquiries about this virgin land inhabited by only a few Indians, fugitives from justice, and wild animals. Then they purchased huge tracts and came with armies of slaves to clear the ground and open plantations along the rivers and on the creeks. Roads, too, after a fashion, were constructed. If they were mule belly deep in mud in the winter and storm swept with dust in the summer, it did not greatly matter, for there were the rivers, the Mississippi, the Yazoo, and the Sunflower, to serve as arteries of transportation. And here on the banks of the rivers, in the bends of the streams, on ridges or high grounds, safe from the floods, the pioneer planters of the Delta built their homes. This was a regime of the wealthy, well-born planter, an economy of the huge plantation worked by large numbers of slaves. There was no room and no welcome for the small, non-slave-holding farmer who with his family's labor might till a few acres. This was a society of gentlemen, overseers, and slaves. If now the gentlemen have almost vanished, if the sons and grandsons of overseers rule where they once reigned, and the slaves liberated into a dubious freedom, it still remains true that neither then nor now has the Delta ever welcomed the so-called poor white. He took to the sterile hills of Mississippi. There he raised large crops of children and meager crops of cotton. He worshiped a fierce God, hated aristocrats and Negroes, dwelt in poverty and darkness, and awaited the day when he might descend upon these fat lands. Now 2 terms out of 3, his governor rules the state, his senator sits in the seats of the mighty, and he himself is coming down from the hills. The pioneers of the Delta, faced with a host of difficulties and intent upon founding a civilization in a wilderness, did not know that this land sheltered one of the most stubborn and dangerous diseases known to man. It lurked in the swamps and lowlands of their new home. Its symptoms were still identical with those described by Hippocrates more than 2,000 years ago. Its effects were as deadly here as they had been in Greece and Rome and India, where it had decimated armies and depopulated cities. That disease was malaria. In the spring and summer, and often until late in the autumn, and nearly every man, woman, and child in the community was ill with malaria. They burned with fever. They froze with chills. Their teeth chattered and their temples flamed. In the intervals between the attacks, which came every 3rd or 4th day, they were listless and exhausted, too dull to think and too tired to work. Traveler after traveler noted the physical debility of the people. The most charitable ascribed it to unknown causes. The less charitable said that they were lazy, but the disease went on and its cause was unknown. Each year, the bodies of the victims were drained of vitality and their minds of vigor. Each year, many died and found premature graves where they had hoped to find happy homes. There is no way to estimate accurately the social and economic damage caused by malaria in the Delta. Its destruction in terms of human pain and suffering is immeasurable, but it was undoubtedly a factor of grave importance in impeding the progress of this section. Men are not active in the white shadows of anemia. They do not create an exhaustion. They cannot function in fever. Life, to be fruitful, must be more than rhythm swinging from chill to chill. Malaria came year after year at almost mathematically regular intervals. The community knew when it would come, how long it would stay, and what it would do. They saw it so often that they became accustomed to it despite pain and suffering. But when the deadly yellow fever came along among them, they were stricken with terror. It did not come at regular intervals. Its victims did not linger. They quickly died horrible deaths, or in rare cases recovered. The cause of the disease and its treatment were equally unknown. The people were helpless before this deadly scourge. When the stricken began to vomit black and cough up their life's blood in thick clots, when their chests turned yellow and their enfeebled bodies were storm-swept with dreadful retchings, the living could do nothing to assuage the agony of the dying, save to pray at their bedsides and await the coming of merciful death. Safely, they knew, lay in flight to the north. Many would not go, others could not go, and still others would not leave their friends and relatives behind. Through the long, hot, melancholy summer of 1878, hundreds sickened and died of yellow fever, while the living, worn with pain and grief, nursed the sick and buried the dead. Volunteer nurses, one after one, contacted the illness and died. Others stepped promptly forward to take their places. There seemed to be no way to arrest the busy, inexorable hand of death, until, as the Greenville Times reported in November of that year, a big white frost last Monday morning was a glorious sight for our people to see. To those within the infected districts, it was a token of rescue and rest. To those who were shut off from their homes, it was assurance that their exile would soon be over, and the sad homecoming was near at hand. With what agony of heart the white robes of the blessed frost was watched and prayed for. None can know save those who passed the fearful hours within the death-haunted districts, and friends and relatives who watched and waited for dark clouds to pass away. The white frost of the autumn of 1878 marked the passing of yellow fever for that year, but not its final end. It came again and again to claim its victims in the summer and retreat before the frost in the autumn, and when it did not come, the threat of its coming chilled the hearts of the people every year. It inflicted untold suffering and grief, kept prospective settlers and investors away from the Delta, and wrought enormous damage to the entire economic and social structure.